Coming up on Nebraska Stories, a mother's love blooms eternal for her lost twins. Enjoy a scenic walk to the iconic Chimney Rock. A son crafts a lasting homage to his father. And Willa Cather takes her place in Statuary Hall.
So I found out about the graves, or the babies being buried there, probably back when I was like 13 years old or 14. I thought it was made up, but Jean said it actually said that on the sign about those flowers blooming.
And we found it, and when we turned on it, it was like an abandoned road, like completely overgrown, like almost looked like an eerie type lane. So we go down it, we're walking down it, looking around, where is this, what's it going to look like? And then we see it, and to me, what I remember of it is a gated, like a black fence. It looked like any kind of a spooky movie.
Nearly 10 miles northeast of small-town Ravenna, across from a rural cemetery and hidden within the overgrowth of an abandoned road, exists a gravesite said by locals to be the final resting place for a pair of infant twins. The burial site is notoriously difficult to access and even more difficult to locate. Those who may have stumbled upon it by chance often have a hard time recalling its exact location. Yet, to those who've stood face to face with the marker, it's left a lasting impression, one that's mystified locals for decades. But before the twins ever became a local legend, they were simply children, starting a new life in the United States with their parents, August and Anna Zeller. The twins were German immigrants, 19th century pioneers of the American West. Their father, August, was a shoemaker in Germany, and at the age of 25, he and his wife, Anna, decided to leave their life in their home country behind. In July of 1880, the family arrived in New York, where they would begin their 1,423-mile journey to Nebraska. They settled just north of what would later become Ravenna, in a small, sod house where the family would continue to live well into the 20th century. August began his life in the United States as a farmer, and he and Anna continued to grow their family, raising 10 more children in the coming years. But the twins, their firstborn children, who bravely endured the long and treacherous journey to America, never lived to see the new life their family built. Although the cause of death and date of their passing have been lost to time, the children died shortly after the family arrived in Nebraska. Their mother buried them roughly 100 yards south of their home, marking the grave with a plot of irises. In 1980, over a century after the twins had passed, a local farmer noticed the irises blooming in his pasture. Remembering the story of the twins, Bud Pritchard took action, and with the help of the Sherman County Historical Society, he and his wife Elsie built a marker to remember the children and protect the burial site. Decades later, the homemade marker still stands. The crude structure, built from the farming materials Pritchard had on hand, protects the irises that continue to bloom after all these years. But to Kirk Zeller, a fifth-generation descendant of August and Anna, the burial is more than a humble sign and a bit of history. It stands as a reminder of his heritage.
I've always been curious about the family history and always felt a deep connection to it, a connection to my, German ancestry. And so I was very intrigued when I did find out about it and went out there. And I've gone out there to take pictures with all three of my kids at different stages in their life, because it's something that, something that I think is really important to pass down.
No matter where his career takes him, Kirk always finds himself returning to Ravenna, where he can reflect on his family's heritage and revisit the place where his story began.
I remember coming here with my son, and he didn't say a word. I explained to him coming here in advance of what we were doing and where we were going after we'd visited the homestead, and he just walked right over here and sat down, crossed his legs, bowed his head, and just wanted a moment of silence and sat here in front of this, thinking about the sacrifices they made. He told me later, and how grateful he was that he was able to be an American.
To some, a ghost story taken right out of a spooky movie. To others, a cherished piece of family history. Throughout the grueling era of westward expansion, thousands of pioneers lost their lives as they pursued prosperity on the new American frontier. Some of these brave men, women, and children are remembered fondly, their burial sites identified by a granite headstone, historical marker, or a handcrafted sign. But many of these graves remain unmarked, undocumented, and forgotten. For every inspiring legend of resilience, sacrifice, and preserved family heritage, there are likely hundreds more completely lost to time.
I'm appreciative that some of the things, some of the old churches and stuff, there's at least landmarks where they once were. And I'm hoping we can preserve that stuff so other people in future generations, 2 or 3, generations later, have the ability to go back and be able to physically understand, wow, my great-great-great-grandparents lived here. I think it's important to feel that, that connection.
Larry Bowers is building a ship. He's not doing it from memory, but from memories.
Dad never talked about actually working on the boat. He would talk about some of the fires and that the boat was involved in.
Larry's dad, Lynn, worked on a real-life fire boat, the LA City No. 2, near Los Angeles in the San Pedro Harbor. Lynn Bowers and the others aboard helped to pull water from the harbor to help put out fires on the shore.
He joined the fire department in October of 1941. Of course, Pearl Harbor was in December 41. And I think he stayed on the boat until the end of World War II when he was transferred to a traditional fire station in Los Angeles.
In the early 2000s, the boat was retired. Larry purchased plans of the ship to build a model for his dad, but that didn't happen. His dad passed away in 2012.
I got some drawings from the fire department, and I was thinking of building it. My dad was still alive. He was in his late 80s at the time. And life got in the way. I just never got around to it.
Larry eventually got to see the boat at the Los Angeles Fire Department Harbor Museum during a trip to California with his brother. He learned the boat was being restored, but no one would be allowed below deck where much of the work took place. Larry made the museum an offer.
I said, I'll build it and give it to him, but I'll do a cutaway showing the what's called the engineering spaces below deck, the engines and the pumps and the piping and all that really neat stuff. And he said, sure, go for it.
Larry's model building work in the basement of his home started with lots of research.
I might spend 2 or 3 hours down here building something, but I might spend 2 or 3 hours upstairs on the computer. I correspond with the folks at the museum. In the last 6 months that I've really been building this thing, I bet we've exchanged 300 or 400 emails. I need a piece of information, they'll go out to the boat and they'll actually look at it, measure it, or research their archives, and they'll send me the information back.
Building the model is almost as detailed as building the actual boat, right down to the rivets.
So every 18 inches, there's a series of rivets, and I have about 14,000 of these little rivet impressions put in the boat.
From the water pumps to the fire hose reels, no detail is too small to be included.
The engines are so intricate. There's spark plug wires, there's carburetors in them, there's fuel lines, oil lubrication lines, oil filters.
Larry even used 3D printers to construct copies of the engines to ensure they were exactly identical. Looking back, the entire project could have been overwhelming.
If you think about this thing as an overall project, you'd probably give up before you even start. The way I approach it is, everything's just a little project. You get the engine done, you get the pump done, you move on to the next thing. You don't think about a whole bunch of stuff down the road.
His work on the model kept him busy for several hours each day, and that was just the time he spent in his workshop.
The crazy thing is, I might be out mowing the lawn, but I'm thinking about how I got to do something. So it's, you know, I might be or walking the dog, and I'll all of a sudden, hey, I can make this part this way or that way, and so my mind's always kind of churning through how to build something on the boat.
Now, after 10 months, his masterpiece of a model is complete.
I step back and go, wow, that's cool.
Larry's been building models of boats since he was a young child. He thinks this one will be his last, and
by far, it's my best.
he'll eventually make the trip to Los Angeles and donate the boat to the Fire Department Museum.
Like any of my models, I love looking at them when they're done, but they sit here in my basement, and me and the dog look at them and don't pay any attention. So I'm glad that this is going to be someplace where other people can see what it looked like.
In all, Larry has invested nearly 900 hours of work on this 4-foot memorial to his dad, who he believes has been with him through it all.
Yep, I think he's looking over my shoulder. I'm going to put a dedication, like a little plaque on there, you know, dedicating to him, showing his picture, and I think that'd be pretty cool. I just wish he could see it. I just miss talking to him, so it's, I'm sorry.
This model of a boat 1,500 miles away from nearly 80 years ago is bringing this son and his dad a little closer.
You'd like it. Yeah, he would be really happy.
And here we are walking to the Capitol, and it was a perfect day. It was beautiful. The sky was blue with clouds. But we saw the dome and the fountains and all of it, and it was just this entering this beautiful space. It was just gorgeous. We walked through the main hall, the hall opened up, and there were photographers from all around the world there. The place was packed.
Sculptor Littleton Alston arrives in Statuary Hall on the second floor of the U.S. Capitol on the most thrilling day of his professional career. His 7-foot bronze of Nebraska writer Willa Cather is hidden under cloth. Today, she'll be unveiled for the world to see.
Her novels, her writing, her presence, her influence. I think that's what makes her great. Telling a story about our nation through her characters in a way that allows all of us, even today, to connect, to feel a sense of connectedness to the past. We're nothing if we don't understand our past. We're nothing if we don't have artists who understand that.
What would Willa Cather think of the recent past, when protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol and moved through Statuary Hall on their way to challenge the U.S. election?
Unbelievable. Yeah, we are televising the breach.
Listen, you can't get through with a hairbrush that's metal. How do they get through with a flagpole?
That's right. We own it. We own you.
2.5 years have passed. The physical evidence of the insurrection is gone as Willa Cather prepares to take her place in Statuary Hall.
I know you're excited, but I'm more excited because this is the first statue I get to do as being Speaker. You know, every state sends 2 statues of extraordinary citizens to the U.S. Capitol to represent them in Washington. By law, the statues have to be made of bronze or marble. But make no mistake, the men and women we honor here are living symbols who represent our national memory, our patriotism, and our shared American creed. E pluribus unum, out of many, one.
It was 2019 when Littleton Alston was chosen from among 70 artists to create a bronze of Nebraska's world-famous author. He began by listening to her books and looking at her many portraits.
I look at each of the images and just to sort of get a sense of her, but also just to make sure that because I sculpt from the inside out, that everything is there. So I'm not making a doll. I'm actually making a human form. There are times when you're moving, when you're sculpting a form that's moving through space, there are a lot of dynamics going on. You may not recognize it as just a viewer, but to the artist, there's 1,000 things happening, and you're trying to orchestrate all of that. And there are days in which I would go in and make changes and think, oh, I've got it. Oh yeah, that's it. And then I'd go home and come back in the morning and go, oh no, that's not it. That was most frustrating.
Alston unveiled the first version of his statue in Willa Cather's hometown of Red Cloud, Nebraska.
I look at the maquette as a poem. And then I look at the 4-foot version as a short story. And then the 7-foot, which will be in bronze of Willa in Statuary Hall, will be the novel.
The next time he unveiled Willa Cather in his Omaha studio, she had changed. Members of the Willa Cather National Statuary Hall Selection Committee were impressed. The poem has become the short story.
I wanted to capture that wind surrounding her and her vision. Also, I put in around her the memories of Nebraska. So there's the wagon wheel and the arc of the wheel here as well as here. And then the cane coming up with her pen and her writings. So she's striding forward into history.
I like this better than that. I liked that when I saw
Yes.
Red Cloud.
Yes.
But this is less matronly.
Yes.
And I like that because she doesn't need to be portrayed matronly. She needs to be alive, and I love the look on her face, like she is thinking and she is looking ahead. It's quite moving.
Finally, at a foundry in Colorado, Alston supervises the finishing touches on his vision of Willa Cather, the novel.
It's like an adrenaline rush, and it's beautiful to see it. The heat and the fire and just the way in which it becomes almost a primal emergence of a form, doesn't it? It's just astonishing. It's almost like we're pulling it out of this cradle, right? And it's just, it's coming alive right in front of you.
After that, Willa had to go into storage. She was ready, but Statuary Hall was not. It would be almost 2 years before Congress was prepared to dedicate another statue to the collection. By the time Willa Cather joined the Hall of Statues, it was the 150th anniversary of her birth.
We ready? Yep. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Littleton, she is beautiful. Willa is stepping forward, just like you told us she would. Thank you. Cather's vivid, reflective writing has become synonymous with the pioneer spirit of Nebraska.
Littleton Alston's bronze statue, on its granite pedestal, stands 10 feet tall and weighs nearly 1,200 pounds. The gold inscription on the front reads, Nebraska, Willa Cather, author, 1873 to 1947. And as she wrote in her novel, O Pioneers, the history of every country begins in the heart of a man or a woman.
There's a sense that a lot of things had come full circle. And I feel as though I've been lifted onto a carpet and just sort of flown around. It was really beautiful.
Littleton Alston is the first African American to create a statue for the collection. His Willa Cather replaces J. Sterling Morton, founder of Arbor Day, who was also a fervent supporter of slavery. 4 years earlier, Nebraska replaced a bronze of orator and politician William Jennings Bryan with Chief Standing Bear of the Ponca tribe, whose famous courtroom battle established Native Americans as persons under the law.
I think Nebraska is more than you think. I think the people of Nebraska are so diverse and so independent in so many ways that you'll be surprised at what you'll find. And I think that that's the great strength of Nebraska. We are capable of always accepting others who are on that journey in trying to find a home, and also inviting them into the home of Nebraska and letting them understand and appreciate what it is to be a part of this. And I think on that day of the dedication, we were unified, all of us, and it was joyous.
Watch more Nebraska Stories on our website, Facebook, and YouTube. Nebraska Stories is funded in part by the Margaret and Martha Thomas Foundation and the Bill Harris and Mary Sue Hormel Harris Fund for the presentation of cultural programming.